Welcome to Step Into the Pivot. We're your hosts. I'm Teresa Conti.
And I'm Ivana Polonio. We talk with people just like you. We have honest conversations about current issues that women and men face and how we pivot to address them in our lives.
This podcast is your companion as you step into a workout or take some time for yourself. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Step Into the Pivot. Today's guest, we have Dawn Mabery Chestnut. So Dawn, I'm going to really let Ivana introduce her, but as always, you can see all of her information, her bio on our website, stepintothepivot.com. And Dawn, we are so happy to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Teresa and Ivana, for having me. It's an honor.
The honor is ours, Dawn. Well, as a matter of fact, Teresa, here's what's going to happen today. This whole conversation will be basically about Dawn's bio. So the podcast is we're just going to, for 20 minutes, we're going to talk about Dawn's bio. I'm kidding a little bit, but one of the first things you told me when we started to get to know each other, Dawn, is you said, I'm a career changer. And I got really curious and I was like, tell me more. What do you mean by that? And as you shared some of these stories that we can't wait to share with our pivoters, I realized that, simply talking about what you've been through in terms of, how did you build what you're doing today, which is financial planning. You have your own financial planning firm and you show up in the world with this. One of the first things I shared with you about, here's what's coming up for me when I see you and interact with you. I was like, you're a natural teacher. And you said, funny, you should say that. I have some experience with that more formally. But as soon as we started talking about like what your roles are like and what your jobs are like and what your history of employment has been like, we drop in deeper. And then it becomes about inner work, about transformation. So tell us about one of your first transformational experiences when it comes to your career and, being in this, world of work while figuring out who you really are.
Well, one of my first transformational experiences was actually being laid off. And, that can be and is a very devastating thing for a lot of individuals. And, at face value, it was initially for me as well. But I later come to see it as a good thing that helped me to move on to, issues and matters and work that I believe I was volunteering at that time, into maybe and move into that in a more career way. So I did a complete career change.
So before we talk some more about the volunteering experience, I know that one of the words you shared with me when you talked about the that the news comes, the change is coming, you're being let go. The awareness that this may have just been, you used the word placeholder experience, that this job was this role was a placeholder, and that a question started to come up for you like, well, maybe I didn't really want this to begin with. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and it came to me, it wasn't right away because, first all those horrible feelings will hit you when you experience something that you weren't expecting to experience, like a layoff. Um, but yeah, I can call it a placeholder. I was in politics for years, and majored in political science, like everything. So I thought, that is the way my life I was going to go. But when I got laid off and I started exploring, okay, what are some things that I'm interested in? Okay, I've got to make this change. What are some things that I'm interested in? And I discovered a passion for another line of work, financial planning, that I never really knew I had before. So that's what I say, when I say that job, when I got laid off of it, I was like, in retrospect, it was a placeholder because I finally found my passion in what I do, and I love to do it. And I do it in more than one capacity now, and I just absolutely love it.
So it's really cool because, you know, I say that to people all the time. I talk with a lot of interns or, you know, young professionals. And I always say to them, make sure it really is something you love, right? You have to enjoy it. You're going to work for many years. So make sure that's something you love. So can you talk a little about the enjoyment piece and something you really found a lot of enjoyment in when you were starting this kind of new part of your career?
Well, I've been volunteer teaching financial literacy for kindergartners on up to adults. And I just absolutely I loved it. I loved helping people to understand how to manage their money. It just was very fulfilling to me. And I'd done it for years volunteering. And so when I decided, and how I even came to decide to career change into financial planning, it was because my adult students would come up to me after the financial literacy sessions, typically with a tax document or retirement document or some work benefits something packet that they needed to understand. And basic financial literacy just does not cover those issue areas. And so that's how I began to find my way to financial planning.
I love that because, you know, that is something that our whole world needs to do a better job of. That whole financial teaching, you know, starting when they're in kindergarten, starting, you know, through their high school and college career. And I think it's something that really is missing. So I really love that you did that, Dawn. I think that's an amazing piece of your story. And the fact that you love it so much, because I think it really, you can see the results of it and the fulfillment in your conversation there.
Going back to that first experience, there was something there that allowed you from, financial literacy and financial behaviors to feel more at ease with the news that came. So you shared with me in the past, and love for our listeners to hear that too. When you received the information about like, okay, job not happening anymore, first one, there was a sense of, um, I don't want to put any words here in front of you that are not yours. So please, you fill in the blanks, but maybe ease, maybe like, okay, I got this, because you shared with me also, like, I've never been a big spender. So tell us more about what that actually, what that means, what you meant by that. I've never been a big spender.
Yeah, I mean the news wasn't like devastating like financially. It just wasn't. Because and the reason I gave is because I just I just didn't have that personality to be a big spender. So I had a good cushion in my, bank account, and not, because I was effortfully trying to save. It wasn't that. It was from the mere sort of after effect or result of me just not naturally being a big spender. I didn't have to worry about that aspect of being laid off because I knew I had money to cover me for however much time until I found something else. And that was just, I don't know if I give myself credit for that, because that was just innately how I am. I just wasn't a big spender, so I naturally just had funds in my
Yeah.
bank account.
Well, I think you should give yourself a lot of credit, because I do think that is definitely one area that I think we're talking about more now. But, you know, when I was younger, we didn't talk about that. Now they talk, you know, that you want this emergency savings and those kind of things. So when something like this does happen or something else happens, maybe you have to take a leave of absence or whatever that looks like, right? That whole piece of it is really important. And I love that you said, of course you were devastated. We would all be devastated, but you at least didn't have to really worry about that piece of it, that financial piece of it, right? And I think that makes a big difference.
Oh, it definitely did. It
Yeah.
definitely did.
I was curious about your background here, because I know that we do tend to pick up, culture of money, habits, beliefs, and then behaviors because this is what we're looking at our parents or our caregivers, or maybe even lack of caregivers, make certain decisions around us. Those start right away, and we start absorbing, those patterns of behavior growing up. Is there some connection there for you, childhood wise, and some of these, how you manage money? And then do you take that into your teaching, and do you draw some, connections for your students from, your own background and upbringing?
For sure. Our experiences definitely shape us. So for sure, my growing up shaped my views and behaviors around money. And my background is, I come from a large family. There were 8 of us. I have 8 siblings. And so, there just wasn't, and my parents, I was raised by my dad and his wife. And just average, blue collar workers, and there were a lot of kids and, so there was a lot of stretching of the dollar. So I didn't, grow up, seeing money, spent frivolously on, or, any type of regular basis at all. So I'm sure, that impacted me as I became an adult and how I, spent money. I just was never in the practice of spending a lot of it. I paid for what I needed, and that was pretty much it. So I think my background definitely has, shaped that, molded me in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as we talk about all these things, I'm noticing you're like the inner listening. A few sentences ago, you talked about like naturally, I'm just not drawn to do that. Naturally, I'm just not attracted to that kind of it. Does that resonate? But then there's also the upbringing of like, and there wasn't anything to spend. There was something really cool you said about like by the time it was my turn, like there was just there was no opportunity even physically. I'm thinking about some of my history, right? Even if I'd wanted to, I couldn't have spent frivolously because there wasn't anything to spend. Like, so, but also naturally, there's this like inner listening for like, wait, if I do spend now when I have the money to spend, like, will this bring me joy? No, it actually feels kind of empty. I'd rather save it for something more meaningful or more important. And sometimes that's that cushion. So I'm just noticing this inner listening. So you get laid off, you don't take it personally. I know you didn't, because you and I had time to unpack that situation more. Then you're teaching, you're volunteering, and you're listening. You're like, I really like this. I really like this. This really speaks to me. I'm feeling on purpose when I'm communicating with these people. You're teaching kids, you're teaching grown-ups. Then they start you're flowing when that's happening. But then, after class, the adult learner comes and says, "Hey, Dawn, can you also help me with this other thing? My taxes, something's off here. Can you help?" Now you're recognizing a need. So there's all this like inner listening that you're doing, and there's a lot of, flow and a lot of grace that I witness when talk about this.
Yeah.
Exactly. No, that's exactly right. And we've condensed it, how the time, it might seem like a short time frame, like I got laid off and then I immediately did this. No, this was over some time of coming to realizations and that sort of thing. But yes, I eventually got there and started my own financial planning firm to help the individuals that needed help, that were asking me for that type of advanced help that the financial literacy just was not providing.
So even mentioned a word that I love, grace, and it does seem like you have that. You're calm, you're clear, you know what your strengths and skills are. But I think you did have some time there where you kind of had to muddle your way through. Can we talk a little about that, and what your thought process was there and what you struggled with, and kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question, because by no means was this all a perfect laid out blueprint plan that was followed. I mean, one of the biggest challenges when I decided to start my own consulting firm was there just weren't a lot of people who looked like me that I could turn to and ask, how do you go about doing such a thing?
Mhm.
I luckily found great resources and like the city, like Women's Business Center and stuff like that. But it really was a muddling through. Like, I remember my first year of being self-employed. Don't ask me how I confused this or, but I did not pay federal taxes. For some reason, I was paying quarterly state taxes, but I was not paying quarterly federal taxes. So that first year tax return, that was like a very big, I was like, whoa, this is a big mistake because it was a hefty bill due.
Yeah.
And back to that, I was never a big spender. Thankfully, I had the money in a savings account and I could just pay the bill. But yeah, I made like major mistakes like that
Yeah.
along the way. And it was by no means a turn on a dime. It took, some time to come to the realizations of what I was trying to do and how to go about doing it in a way that made sense. So I'm glad you brought up the muddling through because there was a lot I needed to learn as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, and also about my field I was, switching to, which was financial planning. I've got several designations I need to go get. Some of them I had to try more than once to get them. So it was by no means a quick turnaround, easy thing to do.
Yeah. No, and I was a business owner for 25 years, so I know exactly what you mean. And it's a different it's like you need to do the job, right? But you also have this other piece of it that is running the business. And you talked about the paying the taxes and doing the tax return and all these other little things that you don't really know. And I'm happy to hear you say that at least in your town there was some resource and some things, but it's true. We don't have a lot of those for business owners in general, whether they're men, women of color, or whatever that looks like, right? So now our listeners know, I mean, they can reach out to you or me if they are thinking about being an entrepreneur and we could help them. And even as well, right? It's a different sort of process. So it is really true. I love that you're very honest about that whole muddling through because we've all been there.
Yeah.
If you want to be a business owner, you've been there at some point. How do I handle this? What do I do with this? I don't, those kind of things. So I think that's really great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And even some of the, when you get the hang of it, um, one way you can describe the external circumstances is that, there is, like with everything in life, but there's going to be highs and lows. And I know there are a couple other folks that we've talked to who are entrepreneurs and who they said on the podcast, the highs, you feel the highs really high and the lows really low. And I want to agree with that on one hand. On the other hand, I'm noticing that when I can neutralize it and go through these experiences, that there's a temptation to feel the high really high and the low really low. But if I can give myself some stability to work through this with some, like, I'd call it neutrality, but it's very like heart open neutrality. There's lots of warmth in there. And I love hanging out with people who are, helping me model that. And remember, when I want to go into like my low feels really low, I'll call Teresa and then she's like, no, come back into the neutral.
Right.
Right? Come back into the neutral. Right. So as we're starting to conclude, tell us about that, way in which you've supported yourself when there isn't an external resource available, where there is, you're muddling through, or the designation is not happening yet, you have to go get it again, or you're teaching one of your adult learners something and you're giving them good advice, but it's not landing, or they're not listening, one of your clients is not listening. How do you stay in that stability and keep going and keep continuing to feel motivated and fulfilled?
Well, I mean, it starts with really my center. It's like, okay, why, why you're doing this. You know the work you put in to get to where you're going. You know, you know how you went through to learn everything. And so it really starts like really within. I try to look within and just start there and just say, Dawn, okay, this is a moment. It will pass. Don't dwell on the negative. And like you said, don't get too excited about the positive. Sometimes keep it, even keel as humanly possible. But it really just starts with the center. And there are lots of groups that I have. We call them masterminds in the profession, where you're talking with other financial planners and investment advisors, and you're speaking with them and you're sharing your struggles and things that work and things that don't work. So those groups and just camaraderie and connecting can be really, really, encouraging and help you keep going. But it's really a combination of at least those two things.
Awesome. So to wrap up, the question we ask everybody is, how was this pivot or these pivots, because you've had several, a step forward for you?
So it was a step forward just in a lot of ways. Like, I am completely, for my enjoyment in life and fulfillment, I am just completely happy now that I am in my purpose. And, even the bad days aren't that bad, because it's all working towards, you're learning from whatever struggle you're in at the moment. So it's all progress to me. And it's propelling me just to be, a better financial planner, a better investment advisor. So it's all forward movement for me.
Yeah, I love that. You said a lot of great words there: happy, purpose, fulfillment, right? You said a lot of great things. And I think what I love about that, and even I'd love to hear what your take is on this, but I think we probably feel the same, is that's what it's really all about, right? You want to be happy. You want to have a fulfilling life. You want to have a purpose. I think that was a really great way to wrap this up.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, Teresa, and you, Ivana. And this has been great.
We're so glad to have this opportunity to talk to you. You are clearly a wonderful teacher. And how we also started to get to know you was because you were posing some questions about a research that Teresa and I were presenting. So I noticed that you are such a student of life also, and those two really blend in your experience. And thank you for telling us a little bit about it today. And with that, an invitation for our pivoters here to step into these pivots when you notice that there's something that starts to throw you off your core, off your center. Lean back into the center and tell us about it. Reach out and let us know your story. Thank you, Dawn.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. So thanks, Ivana. Thanks, Dawn. And thank you to all our listeners. We will talk with you next week.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Step Into the Pivot. We hope you found inspiration and valuable insights from our conversation. Remember, life is a series of pivots, and it's in those moments of change that we truly grow.
If you enjoyed today's episode and want to stay connected, make sure to check out our websites. You'll find additional resources, behind-the-scenes content, and more details about our incredible guests. We love hearing from listeners, so reach out with your thoughts, questions, or your own pivot stories.
To keep the conversation going, be sure to follow us on social media. We're on LinkedIn and Instagram, where we share updates, quotes, and engage with our amazing community.
If you haven't already, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Your feedback makes a difference, and it helps us bring you meaningful conversations. We're signing off, reminding you that every pivot is a step forward. Take care, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Step Into the Pivot.